Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Now that's the epigraph, the beginning quotation from W.B. Yeats' Second Coming, placed in the beginning of Chinua Achebe's "Things Fall Apart." And this poem is very it's very purposeful. It really serves to title the novel and provides the line "Things Fall Apart," which is the title. But this idea of things falling apart is a great, it really defines kind of the plot and action of the novel. The novel revolves around Okonkwo and Okonkwo's family falling apart, with his son leaving him, and really seeing how he falls apart as a person, how his life, his situation, his rank, his titles fall apart, how his fortunes fall apart, how his religion even falls apart when the masks of when the mask of his I believe it's his ancestors removed by the Christians. It really demystifies the religion, removes the idea, the the veil of divinity from them in a way, and really see Okonkwo's society falling apart. But at the same time, one's likely to say, well, that's because of the colonial aspects, the Christians coming in ruining the society. And yeah, that's true. But also, you could really account for that being part of the youth and his son, and just generation after generation, things fall apart. Now, that ties into that epigraph. The opening line of that is not things fall apart, but rather turning and turning in the widening gyre. Now, the widening gyre is this image that Yeats had of these two interconnecting like cones that like intersected each other, and as they intersected each other, there's this time when they're in between one another, and that area is believed to be the unraveling of one society leading into another. And these cycles, these cones that Yeats draws in this image, serve to symbolize the cycles of history, the sort of like economic cycles, the political cycles, the psychological cycles, the philosophic cycles. You see this, governments rise and fall, but at the same time, history repeats itself. People make the same mistakes. People do the same stuff. The psychological sort of things where people's mindsets change, people's artistic, aesthetic favoritism changes. Art has a history of going from Hellenistic, Baroque type styles into more simplistic styles, and that's just kind of the way it goes back. It vacillates between the two over and over again. This turning gyre, this wheel, as it were. T.S. Eliot would describe the nexus of the two, of almost like the nexus of those two gyres, as the still point of the turning universe. This idea of like, and for Eliot, that was the divine presence. That was God. Yeats, he was a little weird. He didn't believe in that stuff. So, but this idea of cycles, I feel like that goes well with Okonkwo. Okonkwo is of this older generation, but he's very different from his father. But then his son is very different from him. And rather than he being like, oh, well, that makes sense. I'm a lot different than my father. It makes sense. He's upset about it. He's angry. And this tends to happen with the older generation. The older generation of people, in our society, that'd be baby boomers primarily, and people born at the Cold War era, as it were. You can really see these people, especially, having one mindset, but then people right now who are in their early 30s and 20s, these people are in a totally different headspace than people who are of the baby boomer generation, people of the Cold War era, where they have this sort of us and them mentality, whereas we are more accepting, we're more about unity and change. And you can see this in our generation really pushing for the LGBTQ community, pushing for Black Lives Matter, even things like Occupy Wall Street could be seen as our generation's values coming and boiling up in revolution. And this is this idea of the turning gyre. We're the next turn in the cycle. And for Okonkwo, that comes out in his son revolting against him, joining the new religion, the new society. He's of the old one, and that's why he kills himself, because he has no place in this new side of the Gyre, as it were. We also can see this in East is East, where the father of the family is he's not cool with his kids, not taking on his beliefs, not taking on his culture. He's upset about that, understandably, but at the same time, they're like, well, we're the next generation. We're now living in Britain. We're British. Let's be British. But then that brings in the idea of, well, you're British, but your family is not originally from Britain. I mean, I don't know if most British peoples are, but really, it's this idea that, this idea of, well, are you truly British, or what truly is Britishness? So that's not so much prevalent at this point, but it is worth mentioning. But again, you see that thing where it's like the generations are the different sides of the sky, or the things falling apart. So their family, their relationships are falling apart. You can see this as well in Adichie's. Pause. But you see that what I find interesting about the relationships between the generations too is that the older generation doesn't believe that their belief system, their society that they've built, they can't perceive that ending. I feel like, I forget who said it, but they said basically like every generation believes their generation is like the end, like they're the apex of time, like theirs is like the turning point. Theirs is where like everything comes to a head, and everything after it's the downfall, or everything after it doesn't even exist. And I feel like that you can really see that with Okonkwo. Like, he can't perceive that there be a new thing, that there be a new society. When he's in his motherland, he keeps talking about his fatherland in these very idealistic terms, and we already saw that's not true. That's why you got kicked out, man, and that's why people didn't approve of you beating your wife and stuff. So we can see that his perception of his own society isn't true. And then you see that with the father in the East is East, where it's like he wants and needs to perceive that his family will be willing to feed into his ideas and his beliefs, and that's why he keeps trying to arrange marriages for his sons, even though he already saw that didn't work, and he kept doing it. And then we see that in Adichie's short story, where we have this husband and wife, and the husband, despite him trying to acclimate his wife to American customs, he wants an African wife. He wants a wife who's submissive. He wants this very stagnated person, this person who will not change. But she's a human being, so she's going to change. And just like generations are going to change, youth are going to change against the will of their parents. And this, I think, illustrates this idea that it was either Baba or it was Fanon, but this idea of when you have this relationship between colonized people and colonizing people, you don't get, there's no way that this new generation can have the old, they can't go back to the way they were. Just like the colonizers can't go back to the way they treated these people before they colonized them. And you can't go back to what it was before. Now you have this new relationship. You have this new relationship, as it were, this new society. I feel like children are much like that, and generations are like that, because every generation is revolting against the generation before that. So you have like the baby boomers were revolting against kind of the society that came before them. They became baby boomers, and Cold War era people were very much against the idea of this generation of people who served their nation to create, to fuel the war machine of World War II, and it became much more commercial, much more self-involved, much more isolated in a way. And now we see with this new generation, this global generation, who's now accustomed to the internet, we're seeing a more global idea of a communal sort of reality, despite, you know, how much people would say that the internet separates people. And again, this is us pushing against both of those. We're not feeding into fueling the government's military endeavors like the generation who fueled the World War II. We're not the baby boomers who pushed so hardly against that they became just consumers and that's it. And all their judgment came off of the idea of consumption. We're something of a hybrid. And that's where we exist, is that we are communal. We're focused on how can we better our society. But at the same time, there seems to be this push against this ultra capitalism and ultra Americanism, and we're more looking at the more holistic issue. And in that way, I feel like that's the way I've connected this unit to the ideas of post-colonialism, and how I've connected that and the things we've read in identity, this idea of identity and societal identity, to today as well. So that's going to end this video. Can't wait till next time. That was a lame ending.